The luxurious first-class cabin froze when the flight attendant blocked Sophia's path. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only." The wealthy passenger's stares pierced Sophia like daggers as her legitimate ticket was openly questioned. No one imagined that within minutes, Eduardo Vasquez, billionaire, Sophia's devoted husband, and majority owner of this very airline, would walk through that door and completely transform the power dynamic in this cabin of hasty judgments. She touched the watch on her wrist, a platinum timepiece that Eduardo had given her the day they met, when she was still serving drinks rather than being served. "You deserve all the luxury in the world," he had whispered before rushing off to his emergency meeting, promising to join her at the resort later. The memory gave her strength as she approached the cabin. The head flight attendant, Camila Reynolds, intercepted her with practiced efficiency. Standing tall with her blonde hair pulled into a perfect bun, not a strand out of place, she radiated the kind of authority that came from years of sorting people into categories at a glance. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," Camila said, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. "This section is for first-class passengers only." The words hung in the air, each syllable precisely calculated to convey both policy and judgment. Sophia felt a flush creeping up her neck, not from embarrassment, but from a flood of memories. Just 3 years ago, she had worn that same uniform, had spoken those same words, but never with that tone. "I have a first-class ticket," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She extended her boarding pass, noticing how her hands, unadorned except for her simple wedding band, contrasted with Camila's French manicured perfection. Camila took the ticket between 2 fingertips, as if touching something distasteful. Her eyes, rimmed with precisely applied liner, narrowed as they scanned the document, then flicked up to assess Sophia once more. There seems to be some kind of error," Camila replied, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising in theatrical doubt. "Perhaps you were incorrectly entered into the system." She made a show of examining the ticket from multiple angles, her lips pursed in exaggerated skepticism. Around them, the cabin seemed to collectively lean in. A man in an Italian suit lowered his financial newspaper, gold cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his reading glasses. "Happens all the time," he commented with casual disdain. "Economy class is getting too crowded these days." Several first-class passengers glanced up from their pre-flight routines, some with barely concealed smirks, others with uncomfortable curiosity. A couple in matching designer outfits whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Sophia and her modest attire, as if witnessing an exotic specimen that had wandered into the wrong habitat. Sophia felt herself standing at the intersection of 2 worlds, the one she had left behind and the one she had married into, yet somehow belonging fully to neither. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years in Camila's shoes, yet now found herself on the receiving end of that practiced condescension. Camila's smile tightened into a mask of false sympathy, her teeth blindingly white against her crimson lipstick. "Let me check if there's a place for you in the back of the plane. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." The emphasis on comfortable carried layers of meaning, a verbal shorthand for with your own kind. Sophia felt her professional training kick in, the same training that had once made her one of Stellar Airways' most valued flight attendants. She maintained her composure, shoulders back, expression neutral. "Please check again. My husband purchased this seat specifically for me." A subtle ripple of reaction moved through the nearby passengers. The woman with a diamond necklace, one that could easily fund a small charity for a year, laughed softly, the sound like ice cubes clinking in crystal. "Your husband?" Her voice dripped with condescension. "Darling, everyone says something like that when they want an upgrade. Next you'll tell us he's a CEO, or something equally creative." Discreet laughter rippled through the cabin. Sophia touched the watch Eduardo had given her, the cool metal against her skin a reminder of who she was before all this, before the mansions at charity galas, when she was just Sophia Mendez, the youngest head flight attendant in Stellar Airways history. In that moment, she almost missed the simplicity of her former life, where respect was earned through competence rather than connection. A businessman nearby tapped impatiently on his armrest, the rhythm betraying his irritation. "Some of us have meetings to get to," he commented to no one in particular, checking his watch, a similar model to Sophia's, though he'd likely never noticed the connection. "Can we resolve whatever this is and take off?" Camila straightened her already perfect posture, the gold stripes on her uniform catching the light as she shifted. "Please wait here while I resolve this misunderstanding," she said with an artificial smile that never reached her eyes. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "Perhaps it's better if you wait at the boarding gate while we clarify the situation." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion, but a directive, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned in this domain. Sophia felt a complex wave of emotions wash over her. Embarrassment mingled with indignation, and beneath it all, a flicker of anger that surprised her with its intensity. She could easily mention that she was Eduardo Vasquez's wife, that her husband was the principal shareholder of Stellar Airways. One word from her could transform this entire interaction in an instant. But something inside her resisted. Why should she need her husband's name to be treated with basic dignity? Wasn't that precisely the kind of dependence she had been trying to avoid since marrying Eduardo? The cabin manager approached, his expression serious beneath his perfectly positioned hat. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to handling situations discreetly. "Ma'am, it appears we have a problem with your reservation. I'll need to ask you to accompany me off the aircraft while we resolve this." His tone was professional but firm, brooking no argument. The looks from other passengers weighed on Sophia like physical things, pity and disdain in equal measure. A woman in her 60s, wearing what appeared to be a full set of sapphires that matched her tailored suit, clicked her tongue disapprovingly. A young executive typing furiously on his laptop barely suppressed a smirk without looking up from his screen. Sophia stood her ground, drawing on years of experience handling difficult passengers herself. Her voice remained quiet but steady. "My ticket is valid. I have every right to be here." Camila's smile hardened at the edges. "Security protocols, ma'am. We can't have just anyone sitting in first class without proper verification. Just anyone." The words hung in the air, laden with implication, a boundary drawn between those who belonged and those who didn't, based on nothing more than appearance and assumption. It was at that precise moment that the aircraft door opened again. The aircraft door opened with deliberate precision, revealing the imposing silhouette of Eduardo Vasquez. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders, his presence commanded attention without effort. His navy blue Tom Ford suit, tailored to perfection, contrasted with his confident, relaxed posture. Silver threads at his temples added distinction to his otherwise dark hair, cut in an executive style that spoke of power without ostentation. The cabin fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft seemed to recede, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. Eduardo paused at the threshold, his steel blue eyes scanning the space methodically. He took in the scene with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating complex situations in seconds, a skill that had built his fortune and reputation. When his gaze locked onto Sophia being confronted by the staff, something shifted behind his eyes. Those who knew him well might recognize the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clenching of his jaw, warning signs of the controlled fury building beneath his composed exterior. Inside, Eduardo felt a visceral response seeing his wife cornered. He had rushed from his meeting, making 3 calls from the car to ensure the flight would wait, wanting only to surprise Sophia with his presence. Now, witnessing her dignity under assault, he felt protective rage mingling with pride at her composure. "Sophia," Eduardo's voice was deep and measured, yet somehow filled the entire cabin. "Is there a problem?" Camila and the manager exchanged panicked glances, uncertainty replacing their previous confidence. Recognition dawned in their eyes, not just of who he might be, but of what this moment meant for them. "Sir, we're just resolving a small seating confusion," the manager explained, his tone suddenly solicitous, body language shifting to accommodate this unexpected variable. Beads of sweat formed at his hairline despite the cabin's careful climate control. Eduardo walked down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned not just the plane, but the very air around it. Each deliberate step brought him closer to the confrontation, passengers shrinking back instinctively as he passed. Some reached for their phones, the subtle glow of screens illuminating faces as recognition spread through the cabin like ripples in still water. "But that's my wife's seat, correct?" Two-way. His accent carried the faintest hint of his Spanish heritage, giving his words a melodic quality that belied their authority. He hadn't raised his voice, yet every syllable registered with perfect clarity. "Your wife," Camila repeated, the color draining from her face like water from a broken vessel. Her hand moved unconsciously to her collar, adjusting it though nothing was out of place. The whisper that traveled through the cabin was immediate and electric. A passenger near the window audibly gasped. The businessman who had complained about delays suddenly became intensely interested in the safety card in his seat pocket. Eduardo positioned himself beside Sophia, one hand gently touching the small of her back, a gesture both protective and claiming. His six-figure watch gleamed subtly on his wrist, not ostentatious but unmistakably valuable to the knowing eye. He felt Sophia's almost imperceptible lean into his touch, the silent communication between them forged through years of partnership. "Yes, Sophia Mendez Vasquez, my wife," he stated, his voice warm when speaking her name, cooling significantly as he continued. "Has there been an issue with her accommodation?" His question, though phrased politely, carried the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to getting answers. The effect was immediate, like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. The power dynamic in the cabin rearranged itself before everyone's eyes. The manager's composure cracked visibly, his professional demeanor splintering under Eduardo's steady gaze. "Mr. Vasquez, we had no idea. We were just following protocol to verify." "Verify what exactly?" Eduardo asked, his gaze steady and penetrating as it moved deliberately from the manager to Camila, pinning each in turn. Though his expression remained neutral, there was something in his eyes that made both staff members take an instinctive half-step backward. Camila's lips parted, but no sound emerged immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its previous authority. "Whether she belongs in first class based on her appearance." The cabin fell into absolute silence, the kind that seems to swallow even the sound of breathing. The realization of who he was and the magnitude of their mistake began to dawn on everyone present. The woman with the diamond necklace suddenly became fascinated with the view outside, though there was nothing to see but the terminal building. "Mr. Vasquez, we didn't know," Camila stammered, her face now completely pale, all previous arrogance evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The badge on her uniform visibly trembled with her shaking, the gold pins catching light with each nervous movement. Sweat beaded along her hairline, threatening her perfect makeup. Eduardo's presence seemed to expand, filling the cabin with an almost palpable energy. Though he hadn't raised his voice or made any aggressive movements, the power dynamic had shifted seismically. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up, not through inheritance or luck, but through intelligence and unwavering determination. "Clearly," he replied, the single word hanging in the air like a verdict. Eduardo carefully observed the scene, his eyes, a penetrating blue that one business magazine had once described as capable of seeing through corporate smoke screens, registering every detail. Sophia's embarrassment, her shoulders slightly hunched despite her efforts to appear composed. The now wide-eyed looks of the passengers, some frantically tapping on their phones as they recognized him. The flight crew's sudden, almost comical shift in posture from authoritative to servile in seconds. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an authority that made each word weigh like lead. "Did you know that before we married, Sophia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Stellar Airways?" His hand remained protectively at the small of Sophia's back. He could feel the tension in her muscles, the way she was holding herself together through sheer will. It only strengthened his resolve. She understands more about protocol and service than probably everyone in this cabin combined. An audible sigh ran through the seats. The woman with the diamond necklace, who had mocked Sophia moments earlier, now intensely studied the in-flight magazine, her fingers nervously twisting her gold wedding band. The businessman who had complained about delays suddenly found his shoes fascinating. She once prevented a mid-air emergency by noticing a passenger's symptoms before even the man himself realized something was wrong. Eduardo continued, a hint of pride warming his measured tone. Save his life. The airline gave her a commendation that's still displayed at headquarters. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the staff. Though I'm beginning to wonder if anyone here has actually seen it. Camila's complexion had gone from pale to ashen. The manager tugged nervously at his collar, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. The other flight attendants stood frozen, as if hoping their stillness might render them invisible. Eduardo continued, his tone unchanged. I asked for the flight to wait for my arrival because I wanted to surprise my wife. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. It seems I arrived at an opportune moment. The pause before opportune spoke volumes, a masterclass in understated threat. No one in the cabin missed its significance. He turned to the manager, who now clutched his hat in front of him like a shield. As a majority shareholder of Stellar Airways, I'm deeply concerned about what I've witnessed here today. The words majority shareholder fell like a silent bomb in the cabin. A passenger near the window audibly gasped. Another choked slightly on his pre-flight champagne. Camila had to lean against the back of a seat to remain standing, her knuckles white where she gripped the leather. Mr. Vasquez, the manager began, his voice cracking slightly. I can assure you this was an isolated misunderstanding. Eduardo raised his hand, the simple gesture immediately silencing the man. Misunderstandings have consequences, don't they? His tone was almost conversational, making the implied threat all the more potent. He pulled his phone from his pocket, typing quickly with decisive movements. Everyone watched, transfixed, as his fingers moved across the screen. The soft tap of each keystroke seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. I've just sent an email to the board. Starting tomorrow, all Stellar Airways employees will undergo a new anti-discrimination training program. He looked directly at Camila, his gaze unwavering. Miss Reynolds, you'll have the honor of being the first participant. Camila swallowed hard, unable to respond, her career flashing before her eyes. The silver wings pin on her uniform, once worn with such pride, now seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. As for the position of Director of Customer Experience that we were discussing filling, Eduardo continued, turning to the manager. I believe my wife, with her previous experience at the company and her recent experience as a customer, will be perfectly qualified to take over. His expression softened slightly as he glanced at Sophia. If she wishes. Sophia's eyes widened slightly. This was the first time she had heard of such a position. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself, her mind racing with possibilities. The offer wasn't just about retribution. It was about recognition of her value, her expertise. Eduardo then addressed the passengers, his voice projected for all to hear, but without raising it. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. As compensation, champagne will be complimentary throughout the flight. Then, just for Camila, he added in a lower tone that still carried to those nearby. Please ensure my wife receives appropriate attention during the flight. Your future with the company depends on it. Camila nodded silently, her empire of arrogance completely crumbling before everyone. The transformation was complete, from imperious authority figure to humble servant in the span of minutes. She stepped back, motioning to the other flight attendants to begin service immediately. No one in the cabin missed the irony or the lesson. The businessmen who had been dismissive now looked on with newfound respect, not just for Eduardo's power, but for Sophia's dignity throughout the ordeal. Some even appeared ashamed of their earlier assumptions, avoiding eye contact when Sophia glanced their way. As Eduardo settled into the seat beside Sophia, he reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The gesture was private, intimate, a reminder that beneath the public display of power was something more meaningful: partnership. At the luxurious beachfront resort, Sophia and Eduardo shared a glass of wine on the private balcony of their suite. The sunset painted the ocean in golden hues, the gentle rhythm of waves providing a soothing counterpoint to the tension of the earlier confrontation. Crystal glasses caught the fading light, casting prism-like reflections across the polished teak table between them. The flight after the initial confrontation had preceded in tense silence, with Camila avoiding eye contact while serving Sophia with an almost painful deference. Each time the flight attendant approached, her hands trembled slightly, the same hands that had so dismissively taken Sophia's ticket hours before. "You always knew how to make an entrance," Sophia commented, a small smile playing on her lips as she swirled the ruby-colored wine in her glass. The memory of the cabin's collective shock still fresh in her mind. Eduardo laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine, so different from the controlled tone he had used on the plane. "This wasn't how I planned our reunion," he admitted, holding her hand across the table, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "But I confess it was satisfying to see their expressions." Sophia contemplated the ocean for a moment, watching as the last sliver of sun melted into the horizon. The sky transformed into a canvas of purples and deep blues, mirroring her complex emotions. "You know, for years I've avoided using your name or position," she said finally, her voice quiet but clear against the backdrop of distant waves. "I wanted to be recognized for my own merits, not as Mrs. Vasquez. And you achieve that every day," Eduardo affirmed, leaning forward, his eyes reflecting the genuine pride he felt. "The charity event you organized raised more money for underprivileged children than any other in the Foundation's history. That was all you, your vision, your leadership." Sophia nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words, yet something still troubled her. She touched the watch he had given her years ago, the day they met on Flight 1857 from Madrid to Buenos Aires. She had served him coffee, corrected his Portuguese when he attempted to order, and somehow caught his attention despite the dozens of more glamorous women who usually surrounded him. Still, she hesitated, finding the right words. "Sometimes I miss my independence, the career I was building, the respect I earned through my own efforts." She looked up at him, vulnerability in her eyes. "Does that make sense? To miss something even while loving what I have now?" Eduardo studied her face for a moment, his expression thoughtful. The dying light cast half his face in shadow, but his eyes remained clear and focused on her. "That's why I created the position of Director of Customer Experience," he said finally. "It's not a favor, Sophia. It's not charity or nepotism. It's because there's no one more qualified." Sophia looked at him in surprise, setting down her wine glass. "You planned this before the incident on the plane?" Eduardo smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a small envelope. "It was going to be your anniversary gift next week." He handed it to her. "The board approved it last month. You have the experience, the vision, and now, after today, you know exactly what needs to be changed." Sophia opened the envelope with slightly trembling fingers, reading the official offer letter inside. The position would give her authority over customer service protocols across the entire airline, a role that combined her past expertise with her recent perspectives. She felt unexpected tears in her eyes, blinking rapidly to contain them. "You never stopped believing in my potential, even when I doubted myself." Eduardo gently touched the watch on her wrist, his fingers brushing against the inscription on its back, words too small for anyone but them to read. "Remember what I said when I gave you this?" Sophia nodded, the memory vivid despite the years that had passed. "That time is the only luxury that truly matters. How we choose to use it, and with whom." "That flight attendant taught me more about dignity and excellence in a 3-hour flight than I learned in years of business meetings," Eduardo continued, his voice soft with the weight of memory. I didn't fall in love with Mrs. Vasquez, the billionaire's wife. I fell in love with Sophia Mendez, the woman who treated all passengers, from the CEO to the child traveling alone, with the same unwavering respect. Sophia squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the day lifting as the stars began to appear above them. The sunset's final glow reflected on the watch that marked not just the hours, but the journey they had shared. "So," Eduardo asked softly, refilling their glasses, "what does the future director of customer experience think about transforming Stellar Airways?" Sophia smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. The path ahead suddenly clear, combining who she had been with who she had become. "I think it's time for a new chapter." She raised her glass, meeting his eyes over the rim, to recognizing worth beyond appearances. Eduardo touched his glass to hers, the crystal singing a perfect note between them, and to surprising those who judged too quickly. As night settled fully around them, they sat in comfortable silence, the ocean's rhythm a reminder that even the most powerful waves eventually find their perfect balance. 3 months later, Sophia stood in the executive boardroom of Stellar Airways headquarters, surveying the faces around the gleaming mahogany table. The quarterly customer experience report displayed on the screen behind her showed dramatic improvements. Satisfaction scores up 27%, complaints down by a third, and employee retention strengthened significantly. "The numbers tell one story," she said, her voice confident as she addressed the board members. "But the real transformation is happening in thousands of individual interactions every day." She clicked to the next slide, showing the redesigned training program she had implemented. "By having our staff experience both sides of service, being the passenger and the provider, we've created empathy that no manual could teach." Camila Reynolds sat near the end of the table, her posture still perfect, but her expression markedly different from their first encounter. After completing the anti-discrimination program, she had volunteered to help develop additional training modules. Her first-hand experience with prejudice and its consequences had transformed her from skeptic to advocate. "Ms. Reynolds has been instrumental in identifying blind spots in our service protocols," Sophia acknowledged, nodding toward the woman who had once tried to remove her from first class. "Her insights have been invaluable." Camila's eyes reflected genuine gratitude at the public recognition, a small but meaningful redemption arc in their shared story. As the meeting concluded, Eduardo entered, timing his arrival for the end of Sophia's presentation. Though he attended board meetings as chairman, he had deliberately maintained distance from Sophia's department, ensuring her authority was established on her own terms. "Impressive results," he commented as the board members filed out, each congratulating Sophia on the turnaround. "Though I'm not surprised." Sophia gathered her materials, a quiet confidence in her movements that hadn't been there before. "The most effective change was the simplest, having our staff rotate through different cabin classes on actual flights. Nothing teaches perspective like experiencing both sides." They walked together toward her office, a space she had designed to be welcoming rather than intimidating, with photographs of Stellar Airways staff from around the world lining the walls. "I heard about your new initiative," Eduardo said as they passed the customer service center, where representatives were engaged in animated conversations with passengers. "Offering upgrades to randomly selected economy passengers?" Sophia smiled. "We call it perspective seats. One passenger per flight experiences unexpected luxury, while our first-class regulars occasionally interact with someone outside their usual circle." She paused, watching the operations through the glass wall. "It's changing the culture one flight at a time." Eduardo observed his wife with quiet pride. In 3 months, she had accomplished what consultants had failed to do in years, not just improving metrics, but transforming the spirit of the company. "The board is impressed," he said as they reached her office, "especially with how you handled the Wilson incident." Sophia nodded, remembering the high-profile passenger who had demanded special treatment and publicly complained when denied. Rather than capitulating, she had stood firm on the new policies, equal respect for all passengers, regardless of status. "Some lessons need to be learned by everyone," she replied simply. Even those who think their wealth puts them above common courtesy. As they entered her office, Sophia paused at the display case near the door. Inside was her old flight attendant uniform, displayed alongside her service commendation and the watch Eduardo had given her, symbols of her journey. "I never expected to be back here," she admitted, touching the glass briefly. "But now it feels right, bringing both worlds together." Eduardo smiled. "You've created something remarkable, a company culture that values dignity above status." Sophia turned to her desk, where a stack of applications waited. Former colleagues applying to return to the airline after hearing about the changes she had implemented. "The true test will be sustainability," she said, ever practical. "Whether these changes become permanent or revert once the novelty wears off." "With you at the helm?" "I have no doubts," Eduardo replied. As he prepared to leave for his own meetings, Sophia caught his hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For not stepping in sooner that day on the plane." Her eyes met his, conveying deeper understanding. "You could have intervened the moment you boarded, but you waited. Let me stand my ground first." Eduardo nodded, understanding the significance of that moment. "You never needed rescuing, Sophia. Sometimes the world just needs reminding of that fact." As he left, Sophia turned to the window overlooking the airport runways, watching as a Stellar Airways plane took off into the clear blue sky. Somewhere on that flight, a passenger was experiencing unexpected kindness. Another was learning about perspective, and the crew was practicing the principles she had established: dignity and respect for everyone, regardless of appearance or status. The watch on her wrist caught the sunlight as she turned back to her work. A reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't the luxuries we possess, but how we choose to treat others when status and appearance are stripped away. So what did you think of this unexpected twist? Did the moment when Eduardo revealed himself as the airline's owner surprise you as much as it shocked that arrogant crew? Unfortunately, many people are judged daily by their appearance, clothes, or background without others knowing their true story and worth. Have you ever experienced a similar situation or witnessed someone being unfairly underestimated?